In this investigation, I will examine why Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb 1964 and Bong Joon-ho's Gisaengchung 2019 rely on genre hybridity as a critical strategy. Although separated by over a half century in radically different cultural contexts, both films refuse to remain within a single genre framework. Kubrick fuses war film, political thriller, and black comedy to expose the irrationality embedded within Cold War command systems, while Bong blends family drama, horror, and dark comedy to articulate the structural violence of class inequality in contemporary South Korea. In both cases, genre hybridity functions as a way of thinking through social contradiction. By destabilizing tonal expectations, these films prevent passive consumption and instead force the spectator to confront systems that are simultaneously functional and catastrophic. Released on January 29, 1964, Dr. Strangelove entered a cultural environment shaped by acute nuclear anxiety. The Cuban Missile Crisis in October 1962 had revealed how close bureaucratic error could bring the world to annihilation, and John F. Kennedy's assassination on November 22, 1963 intensified a pre-existing climate of suspicion and mistrust. Lee Harvey Oswald's connection to the USSR and Cuba meant the event was immediately filtered through Cold War ideology, reinforcing distrust in institutions, experts, and official explanations. At the same time, the legacy of the Second Red Scare and McCarthyism had normalized paranoia within governance itself. Beneath all the public rhetoric, US nuclear command and control systems were compromised by secret delegations of launch authority and delayed safeguards such as permissive action links, producing an always ready, never used paradox that was structurally unstable. Kubrick's satire lands because it does not exaggerate fantasy, but reframes real institutional fragility through the film form and genre, presenting nuclear war not as heroic spectacle, but as an administrative accident waiting to happen. Parasite emerges from a different but equally systemic crisis. South Korea's rapid post-war industrialization had concentrated wealth and power within chaebol conglomerates, producing growth alongside deep structural inequality. The 1997-98 Asian financial crisis and subsequent IMF bailout accelerated neoliberal restructuring, layoffs, labor flexibilization, and long-term income precarity reshaped everyday life, particularly for urban working-class families. Housing became a visible marker of class position, with banjiha, semi-basement, indexing marginality through flood risk, overcrowding, and social invisibility. Bong Joon-ho converts these conditions directly into cinematic form. Vertical space, stairs, basement, windows becomes a spatial code of inequality, transforming economic abstraction into populated geography. As Bong himself frames the film as a human drama rooted in contemporary reality, genre hybridity becomes the tool through which comedy, dread, and violence coexist, mirroring a society where mobility is promised but structurally denied. Kubrick's War Room operates as a visual metaphor for institutional paralysis, a system incapable of adapting to the consequences of its own design. The monumental geometry of the space, conceived by production designer Ken Adam, recalls the tradition of German expressionists architecture, where exaggerated scale externalizes psychological and ideological states rather than realism. Circular lighting and region blocking organize bodies into fixed hierarchies, presenting bureaucratic rationality as precise, legible, and apparently stable. Yet the moment dialogue enters the frames, this order collapses. Deep focus and static framings produce a pseudo-documentary gaze that initially naturalizes authority, only to expose its theatricality. The room resembles a common center, but functions more like a set where power performs competence while revealing its own absurd fragility. Bong Joon-ho's dramaturgy, by contrast, is architecture rather than monumental. Space in Parasite is set vertically. Staircases, semi-basements, windows, and hidden levels repeatedly encode social position. Vertical camera movements, tilts, dollies, and measured ascents or descents transform physical motion into social commentary. Domestic spaces operate as psychological cages, in a sense that the house stores memory, desire, and class tension within its architecture. While Kubrick's mise-en-scene marks institution from distance, Bong inscribes socioeconomic structure directly into space, ensuring that class hierarchy is never abstract and constantly visible. Kubrick deploys a wide range of focal lengths to stage power as portraiture, wide lenses for mocking executives by juxtaposing them against the surroundings which they inevitably destroy, while sudden teleglass for more intense close-ups and isolation of the subject. Those close-ups function like Dre's The Passion of Joan of Arc, where their face becomes a political stage. In Doctor Strangelove, the close-ups mirror egocentric worldview of the government officials during 1950s-60s. Bond, by contrast, relies on continuous camera choreography, lateral dollies, motivated push-ins, and carefully measured cranes that invite embodied identification before taking it away. His crane and tracking passages carry social aspiration in motion. Ascent sells possibility, descends deliver its denial. The effect is akin to the kind of bravura, crowd stage and camera choreography associated with contemporary formalists like Tarantino, those long sweeping moves that map ensemble relation across space, except Bond uses that energy to literalize social gradients rather than to stylize spectacle. The camera therefore toggles the spectator between analytical distance and implicated identification, first selling mobility and then exposing its structural impossibility. Editing is where genre hybridity becomes most explicit. Kubrick crosscuts between institutional loci, the war room, the airbase, and the bomber, not to escalate suspense conventionally, but to produce meaning through collision. This resembles Eisenstein's intellectual montage, where ideas emerge from juxtaposing rather than narrative continuity. Procedural logic becomes absurdist rhythm, culminating in a finale that fuses nostalgic imagery with total annihilation. Bond employs tonal montage to different effect. During the pitch infiltration sequence, editing establishes momentum, confidence, and comedic precision, only to mirror and invert that rhythm during the family's escape from the Parks household. The same formal logic produces triumphant catastrophe, revealing genre itself as unstable. Later, cross-cutting during the flood sequence collapses more distinction between victim and perpetrator, reinforcing Bond's framing of the story as a human drama rather than a typical drama. Genre hybridity in both films also functions as a form of spectatorial control. By constantly shifting tone, Kubrick and Bond deny the audience a stable emotional position. In Doctor Strangelove, the viewer is encouraged to laugh at military incompetence, only to realize that this laughter mirrors the same emotional detachment that enables catastrophe. The film implicates the spectator in the very logic it critiques. We observe annihilation from a safe, ironic distance, just as the war room does. In Parasite, Bond achieves a similar effect through the tonal destabilization, rather than irony. The audience initially aligns with the Kim family's ingenuity, reading the film through the convention of a social comedy or a heist narrative. When the genre shifts towards horror, that identification becomes ethically uncomfortable. The spectator is forced to reassess their complicity in enjoying the family's deception, mirroring the film's critique of a class-based survival itself. In both cases, historical context conditions form. Cold War command and control anxieties allow Kubrick's black comedy to operate with documentary plausibility, its exaggeration rooted in real institutional fragility. Korea's post-1997 neoliberal shock, housing precarity, and entrenched inequality render Bond's tragicomedic reveals not as shocking but inevitable. Genre hybridity in both films is not stylistic excess, it is the only form capable of expressing a reality that is itself self-contradictory. Ultimately, the mixing of genres in Doctor Strangelove and Parasite works to keep the audience actively involved and emotionally off balance. By starting with comedy, both films draw audience with humor and relatability, making the words of paranoid generals or scheming family feel accessible. This strategy is a key to the film's social commentary. Instead of explaining their critiques directly, Kubrick and Bond use genre hybridity to make audience experience the underlying problems. The laughter from the comedic setups makes the subsequent terror or tragedy feel more jarring and impactful. In Doctor Strangelove, the absurdity highlights the insanity of nuclear protocol. In Parasite, the violent turn underscores the brutal reality of class conflict. By utilizing genre in this manner, the directors translate complex societal issues into visceral, emotional understanding for the audience, making the message far more resonant than a straightforward dramatic telling ever could. Ultimately, Doctor Strangelove and Parasite demonstrate that genre hybridity is not about excess, but necessity. Each film confronts a reality too contradictory to be contained within a single genre convention.